Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Buddy Staples video. So today's world is going to be Hero World. So Hero World is one of the lesser supported worlds in Buddyfight, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have its own share of staples or just really solid cards that can be used in a whole bunch of different decks. To start things off, let's go with the newest edition. In Time Dragons that came out with the trial deck and SBT-07, they added basically a Daryl Burke for Time Dragons. So you can only call him once per turn. When this card enters the field, look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand and drop the rest. Then he has the Time Dragon benefit of if you have 2 or more flags reverse this fight, you gauge them instead. But for Hero World, you're going to be dropping them, which isn't the worst thing because certain Hero World decks like their cards in the drop anyway. Just having a generic Daryl Burke for Hero World is just a very solid card and a very solid addition to the world. Next, we have Hyper Energy. So Hyper Energy is your classic charge 4 gauge. That's all it does. Next, we have its Superhero Time. So you can only cast this card if you have an item equipped. Not that big of a deal. Most decks have an item. Its cast cost is pay 1 gauge and pay 1 life. And then you get a look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put one of them into your hand, and then gauge the rest. It's doing a similar thing that the Time Soldier Spigar is doing, but it's just in spell form and it auto gauges them. You can only cast it once per turn, but that's hardly an issue when just being able to look at the top 3 and pick one is a very powerful draw effect, especially one that can be ran in multiple different decks. Next, we have It's About Time I Got Serious. So you can only cast this card if you have 6 or less life. You pay 1 gauge, and then you can draw 2 cards, and then you can only use it once per turn. So even though this card isn't seeing exactly a whole lot of play, I'd still chalk it up as like a staple, more of a budget staple, because it's a generic draw 2, and your only condition to cast this is if you have 6 or less life. So depending on the deck, you could either purposely take damage and then defend the rest of the way through the opponent's combat, or you could sometimes damage yourself to get yourself that low. It all depends on the different type of deck that you're running, but it's just a very solid draw 2 card. Next, we have Call Super Machine. So it's a spell. Its cast cost is pay 1 gauge. Search your deck for a Brave Machine card, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your deck, and then you only can use this once per turn. Why is it so important? Well, because it can search for any Brave Machine card. So the Brave Machine card, if you're not running a Brave Machines deck that you're going to be tutoring out, is going to be Hyper Energy, because it is a Brave Machine card. So that's why Call Super Machine is pretty good, pretty generic, and pretty splashable, because every deck should be running Hyper Energy, and if they're running Hyper Energy and they can afford the deck space, then Call Super Machine is just a very solid addition to that. Next, we have I'm Still Alive. So this is your classic revive card, where if your life would become 0, you pay 3 gauge, and then for the next time your life would become 0, your life becomes 1 instead, and then you can only cast it once per game. Again, even though it's not seeing exactly a whole lot of use, it's just still a very solid spell. Even though its gauge cost is a little hefty, being at 3, it's not impossible for a lot of decks to overcome that hurdle and then still play their own cards. Next, we have New Plasma Mine. So this is their monster canceller for size 2 or less. So when your opponent's trying to call a size 2 or less monster, you just pay 2 gauge and nullify the call. That's it. Pretty short, sweet, and simple. Next, we have Or So the Dream I Had Went. So this is the Hero World Spell Nullifier. So you can only cast this card when your opponent's casting a spell, pay 2 gauge, nullify the spell the opponent is casting. Again, it's like New Plasma Mine, just very, very strong, having those nullify spells and nullify call effects. Next, we have The Shield of Justice Will Never Shatter. So this is one of the more powerful generic defense spells of the game. So you can only cast this during an attack on your opponent's turn, and then nullify the attack if it's not a link attack. It's just pretty strong. Next, we have Cosmo Scarf. So you can only cast this card during an attack on your opponent's turn, and if you have an item equipped, you pay 1 gauge, nullify the attack, then the attacking card can't stand. Again, just a very powerful generic defense spell that Hero World can basically run in almost any deck. And then as far as the last good generic defense spell, there are some more, but I just wanted to highlight the best of the more generic ones. We have Bring It On. So you can only cast this if you're being attacked, nullify the attack, and gain 1 life. Just pretty simple, nullify the attack defense spell. Hero World doesn't exactly have a solid way at resting the opponent's monsters, but it does have some good nullify spells. Next, we have Rescue Dragon Metamorph effect. It has an act ability. You pay 1 gauge. If you do, choose a monster from your deck, put it into your drop zone, shuffle your deck. Then, for this turn, this card's name is also regarded as the one you just put into the drop for the turn. This can be pretty powerful depending on the deck because, one, it's a way to basically self-mill any specific monster you want in your deck. Just that alone is a pretty powerful effect, and then it takes the card name of that card. So if certain combos need specific pieces and it's referring to the piece by name in whatever card you're using, this is a great filler card to basically just act as that card while putting it into your drop, which can be used for a couple of different things. Next, we have Professor Menjo, Instruction Cosmo Tactics. This is probably one of the more interesting, splashable cards in Hero World. It's a impact monster for 1, but you're mostly going to be using it for its various different abilities. For paying 3 gauge and put a monster on your field to the drop zone, it's a pretty easy cast cost for a lot of decks. But what's important is what he does. So when this card enters the field, put the top 5 cards of your deck into your drop zone. If there are 4 or more different attributes among them, deal 1 damage to your opponent. Alright, not so great, but he's got more. If there's 6 or more, destroy a card on your opponent's field. Alright, it's getting better. And then if you have 9 or more, take an extra turn, which hopefully is what you're really going to be trying to get. And then on top of that, he has 3 different types of his own. So between him and Hyper Energy, that's already a total of 4 to 5 different types. And then on top of whatever cards you're playing in the deck, it can add up really quickly, really easily, and then cards like Rescue Dragon Metamorph effect can just put more cards into the drop. I'm not saying he's like the card to build a deck around, even though some people probably would or do. I'm just saying he can work in a lot of different decks, and his requirements for his ability isn't as hard to pull off as it seems. And then lastly, I have Rescue Dragon Project Gunner. So this card only works specifically with decks that have Transform, but if you are transformed, discard this card and then gauge 2, which for any deck that's playing any kind of transform mechanic, that's just a pretty good effect to have overall. It's basically a mini Hyper Energy. What's important is the fact that he's just a cheap and effective way at gaining gauge if you are playing a transform deck. These are all the cards that I would kind of define as Hero World staple cards. A lot of Hero World is more deck dependent. I will have the list of all the cards in the description below. Please feel free to comment if you feel like I missed any that you would want to see or you think is a staple. And I hope you like and subscribe for more Buddyfight content, and I will see you in the next video.